becoming more popular, and we see the sweets in the shops, Halloween themes, and we see more and more celebrations, private celebrations happening around the theme of Halloween. Of course, the Halloween that we know comes from the North America, from the United States and Canada. And so it's taken on a particular flavor from there. So we're going to look at that, but we're going to look around that, some things that are related to Halloween within the Orthodox tradition. And we're going to discuss some of our ways to deal with this feast day. So yeah, I hope it's going to be interesting. Please let me know if you can hear me, see what's going on, and we're going to start right now. Okay, just a second. Okay, hopefully you can see. Okay. So before we look at the origins of Halloween, what we are going to look at is what we see Halloween as today, because I think we shouldn't necessarily have this kind of like aversion to Halloween as this evil celebration that, I mean, a lot of Christians do have that opinion, and many Orthodox Christians. We need to look at how Halloween is manifesting itself now in this current moment. And that is at least what I've seen and what my children really like to always asking to participate in is basically dressing up. And usually now the mixture of children dressing up as something scary and children dressing up as their favorite cartoon characters is about the same. So, and I think this picture kind of sums up the kind of commercialized Halloween that we know, which is basically kids dressing up, getting sweets. Okay, so I don't necessarily think it's such a wonderful feast, of course, because dressing up is fun, but kids getting lots of sweets is not necessarily the best thing to teach them. You know, that's all that the feast is about. But unfortunately, Halloween has become a pretty light and meaningless celebration, like let's just say in America. It's basically to get a little bit scared and to get sweets. But there's an interesting tradition behind Halloween, and it has its roots before Christianity, but there's a debate about whether Halloween itself may have been that particular day was really started by the church for a different reason, and we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to look at some equivalents that actually do take place in the Orthodox Church, particularly in the Russian tradition, not on Halloween, on Christmas. So let's just jump right in. So before we start, I wanted you to imagine something. So imagine now you're living in a village 1,000 years ago. So there's no electricity, and now you've just harvested your last, and now we're living in the northern hemisphere. So we're living in a village, and we've taken our last harvest. It's now the late autumn, and so all the food that we've gathered in our house is all the food we're going to get, basically. We've slaughtered our last animal that we have, and now we're placing it all there, and that's all we have. And then we also notice that the night starts to get darker and darker. And as a peasant living in a village, that feeling is going to have a greater effect on you than maybe it would have on us. It's a feeling that winter is approaching, the time of darkness is approaching, and darkness brings about lots of difficulties for a peasant, for a caveman, for whoever you may be in the ancient world. You have less light to work, so you have less time in the day to work. You can't see anything at night, and the world becomes this mysterious and dark place. And you never know, someone might die in the family, you might run out of food, you might die from the cold, etc., etc. So the feeling when the beginning of winter, it's a particular time that has quite a strong effect on people. I should say that, a deep seasonal effect on people's moods and everything. And so keep that in mind when you look at the feast of Halloween, because it takes place at the moment when the basically the end of autumn and the beginning of the dark period, basically. So think of it like that. Okay, so before we go on, now because Halloween itself, we'll look at the origin of what we call Halloween, but Halloween itself began, at least this particular day. There were pagan festivals, especially Celtic festivals, but basically all over the ancient world, where they would celebrate this period they would basically gather their crops, and then they would have some kind of celebration. And part of that celebration was connected to an idea that the time of, how can I say, it was a time when they would commemorate their departed ancestors, possibly, and they were seen as like a time where the spirit world was kind of the barrier between the living and the dead was thin, and so there was this kind of like connection. Now that itself is something that Christians also celebrated, but in a different way. So Christianity and Eastern Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, has many times of the year when they celebrate particular days where they commemorate. First of all, it's the saints, so the departed, but particularly the martyrs, those who have died for Christ, died as holy men and women, and connected to that day. So this is what's called Saturday. Well, we do this on Saturdays, but we also do this on particular soul Saturdays. So, for example, the Sundays of Lent, and various other days, particular days. But every Saturday is actually dedicated to the martyrs. So if you listen to the hymnography of Saturdays, you'll hear it's dedicated to the martyrs. But what's interesting is there's a connection it's dedicated to the martyrs who died for Christ, and also for all the departed. And there seems to always be this connection of the known saints that we commemorate, and also the unknown saints, those who departed this life before us. So keep in mind now that the church has celebrated these two things together: the saints, all the saints, and the departed. Now, the Orthodox in the Eastern, let's just say Roman world, they didn't celebrate this at the beginning of winter. It was celebrated usually in spring. But in the Western Church, especially on the recommendation of Pope Gregory III, he placed the celebration of all saints, which would have meant all martyrs, so those who have died for the faith. Because originally in the early church, that's who the saint was. The saint was a martyr. And so he moved this All Saints' Day. So can anyone tell me when we celebrate All Saints' Day? After which great feast? Can anyone say? Remember to click on your microphone. So All Saints' Day, celebrate, I'll give you a hint. Fiery tongues.
After Pentecost. I'm trying to switch my mic on.
Oh, sorry. So yes, so we celebrate Pentecost, and then the following Sunday is All Saints' Day. Now, of course, it has a significance because Jesus Christ sends the Holy Spirit to us, to the church, and now we have this ability to receive God's grace in a fuller sense, and so we have the possibility to become grace-filled like saints. Right, so this is when the church celebrates All Saints, right? But in the Western Church, they placed it on the 1st of November. Okay, so the 1st of November was All Saints, and this kind of spread throughout the Western Church. So it was also an obligation in the Frankish Empire.
Yeah, it's still a holiday in France.
It's still a holiday in France.
It's called La Toussaint. And it's Toussaint, All Saints.
All Saints, yeah.
And it's still a holiday.
Yeah, so in all the Western churches, it's still All Saints' Day. Here's an example, I think, of a Lutheran church that's celebrating it. Now, what's interesting is that there's actually 3 celebrations, you could say, 3 feast days that took place. The first one was the eve of the feast. So now this is something that we understand as Orthodox Christians very well. we understand this very well as Orthodox Christians, because every great feast, we begin the feast the night before, usually at a vigil, right? And so this is what was called All Saints' Eve. Now, in the Scottish way of saying it, they say Halloween, ween, which means evening, right? So that's where we get the word Halloween. So the vigil before the feast of All Saints' Day, and then the next day would be All Souls' Day. So you can see that connection I was talking about the saints and the martyrs, and then all souls, all the departed. So there's always been this connection in the church. Usually they separated by a day or something. So this became All Saints' Day. Now, this day that it was placed on happened to be the day that probably, although there's not actually that much evidence, that it may have superseded a pagan festival, which was a celebration of this kind of final harvest. And then there was this idea that the spirit world was close together. So that's possibly a reason why Pope Gregory III did this, to kind of make sure that it was properly understood. Okay. So what we can see here is interesting. So can anyone see what are these things here in front of the church? So what are these candles placed in front of?
Hay bales or something? Office?
Those are graves.
Oh.
Graves. So the original tradition in the Christian tradition, and this is actually, so some scholars think that this is a Christian festival, that the pagan feast was not necessarily on this day. There's just most of the writing about the pagan Celtic practice of this comes from monastic writing. So we're not sure exactly when, but we do know in the Christian church, it was a common practice that on All Saints' Eve, on Halloween, the faithful would go and light candles at the graves of their departed relatives, just like we would at our Soul Saturdays, right? So we already see some idea of bringing light on the dark nights at the graves, praying for the departed family. Okay, so already we see some kind of things that would later become what we now know as Halloween, right? Okay, so now how did All Hallows Eve become Halloween as we know today? Now, from what we can tell is that, or what they definitely know is that it actually, the modern day Halloween in America was brought to the Americas by Scottish and Irish immigrants, basically. So they would have taken now the All Hallows Eve, and so a lot of folk traditions were incorporated into it. They were incorporated from pagan roots, basically, right? And so when Scottish and Irish immigrants went to America, they would have taken some of their costumes and some of their folk traditions, and they kind of infiltrated into American society, and then it developed into what it is today. Kind of like the Santa Claus, the Dutch immigrants who were talking about Saint Nicholas became Santa Claus, etc., etc. So it slowly kind of morphed into this, and so some of the pagan ideas most likely began to kind of become accentuated, right? And this kind of mixture of practices took place, which led to Halloween. So the festival, the pagan festival that Halloween most likely fell upon was called Samhain, which is, well, I say Samhain, but apparently you pronounce it Samhain. So Samhain was celebrated on this first day of winter, you could say, and a lot of the practices that you see in Halloween come from some of the things that were being done at that time. So I think it's really interesting. I found this one of an Irish kind of hero story, pagan hero story, about Samhain, and I thought let's talk about it, because it's something that I think is actually can almost be a kind of foreshadowing of the Christian experience of Christ entering into Hades, Christ bringing light to the dark places, and overcoming death, right? And Hades, the place of the dead. So I'll read what I found online. I think it's really interesting, and we can just talk about it a little bit. So the hero is Finn, right? Finian, I think, is it? So, according to Irish mythology, Samhain was a time when the doorways of the other world opened and allowed supernatural beings and the souls of the dead to come into our world. Well, Beltane was a summer festival, so that's another festival. For the living, Samhain was especially a festival for the dead. And so this hero, Finn, basically let me read it. So each year there was this understanding that this a devil-like beast looked like the devil. His name was Aelin. He emerged from the other world. So at this time when the worlds were open, and he burned down basically the city Tara in Ireland during Samhain. And then he did this by putting everyone to sleep with music. So one Samhain, the young Finn, McCumhale is his full name, was able to somehow stay awake. Quite interesting. So this Finn stayed awake when everyone else fell asleep. So think about death. Just like Christ. Christ, let's just say he went into the tomb, but he was still active, alive. He was with dynamism, right? So Aelin had a magical, Finn had a magical spear. And with that magical spear, he struck Aelin, this image of death, image of destruction, and basically became a hero. Another interesting part of that story was the doorway to the other world, right? Finn's thumb got stuck in it. He got caught between the door and the post as it shut. This door shuts. And so his thumb was kept kind of in the other world. And this gave him a special kind of power because he had been to the other side to come back. Also an interesting image, possibly like a prefiguring of Christ, because he had this kind of this status of one who had been to the other world come back. So these are some of the stories that come from Samhain, this what would be like a prefiguration of Halloween. So think of the doorway of hell has been opened. And so even in the pagan mythology, it was a time where people had to be vigilant against the spirits entering into the world, trying to, cause havoc, cause destruction. And so the hero is even trying to destroy that. And so this brings us now to Halloween. So the reason why I wanted to share that particular story was because we can take pagan stories like that and apply them to what Christ has done for us. He has conquered death, he has conquered the spirits. But as we know, as Christians, we ourselves have to participate in that battle against evil. And so I would say that Halloween, as it's presented to us now in the Americanized version, we can recapture that, make it, Christianize it, not by just getting rid of all the scary stuff, but by placing, by balancing it off with the light of Christ. So what do I mean by that? So one of a very interesting lecturer once came to our church many years back. Papadopoulos was his surname, I remember. And he had a whole talk about death. Now, one of the interesting things he mentioned, which I will always stick with me, was he said that, what is the origin of people's fascination with death? With skulls, with scary movies, with all these things that you see people get fascinated with in Halloween. And he said it's part of the human psychology where it's almost like a child, like a jack-in-the-box. He's scared of it, but he wants you to do it again and again. It's a way of kind of dealing with that fear, dealing with the fear of death. You have to confront it. You have to see it. You have to see something scary in order to kind of begin to battle with it, right? So it's kind of like the story of the hero Finn, the Irish folk hero. He stayed awake. He faced, that scary beast. And that's the only way he could battle it. And so this is in a way what Halloween can be if we don't allow it to just run away from a kind of balanced view of the world, right? And so one of the things I wanted to share was something that came to my attention was that in the Russian folk tradition, so all the Slavic countries, they have a similar type of things happening, but it's at the time of Christmas. Now that shows us that possibly there was always kind of a common pagan understanding that in winter, sometime in winter, there was a this idea that the doors of the spirit world were open. Probably in the Slavic places, it was more around the winter solstice, which is the time of Christmas, right? And so it's interesting that I'll just tell you a couple of traditions in the Russian. Now it's not the church tradition. I just want to be clear. This is a kind of common folk tradition that happens during Christmas. So during Christmas, it's not that common anymore, but in villages and in smaller kind of places, young boys and young children dress up as various figures. Some of them dress up as, shepherds and things like that, but the majority of them dress up as kind of like these little spirits and, like little evil creatures and things like that. But they also carry around a star, the star that would have come and stood over the crib. So it's an interesting kind of mix of things. And then one of the figures that walks around is a goat-headed figure. Now, of course, to us, we understand that's the image of the devil. And it probably was the image of some kind of pagan, whatever, god or something. And Anastasia, my wife, now her father, Anastasia's father, is a teacher of theater. He teaches children theatrical plays, basically. And he often would do make these costumes. So Anastasia remembers having this goat-headed home. He would make it for the Christmas play. And she said it was always kind of very strange. They'd have this weird goat thing. But it was part of the theater, right? And she said one of the interesting things about it is that when the people walk around with in this kind of procession going from door to door, the person wearing the goat head is on a little leash. They kind of walk around with the devil on a leash, if you could say, at least in some of the traditions. So it kind of shows this kind of like keeping the devil, keeping the evil spirits under control. And what's interesting about in the Russian tradition, and this similar thing in Halloween, is that the house itself is a place of light, a place of good, a place of kind of like refuge against the evil spirits. And these people go around and they knock on doors and they also ask for sweets. That's something that you even hear in the carols. But the whole idea is that the people must get them away from the house. So it's almost like the devil is coming to the door and you got to push him away. So in the Russian tradition, they kind of do little pranks and things, and it's usually boys. And the girls in the house, and they kind of kick them out and they push them away and they shoo them away and they would have give them sweets to go away. So that's a common tradition. And I think that although the church doesn't condone it, officially the Russian Orthodox Church is not necessarily happy about Christians dressing as the devil. I can say from my perspective, there is something important about possibly young people facing that kind of reality, that fear of devils and death. And in a way, possibly, this tradition has a role on the human psyche, where we kind of deal with this idea of evil spirits. So the only thing I would say, though, I would be careful of, is that in Halloween, like the modern kind of American celebration, there isn't really a place of refuge. There isn't really an idea of we are, ultimately good has prevailed, and that this night now the devils are coming out and we've got to get rid of them. It's more of just like this kind of like macabre night, and there isn't really like a climax of like maybe now we've driven out these Halloween trick-or-treaters from our town or something like that. That hasn't really remained in the tradition. So I would say that possibly is a way to redeem it, right? I want to show some more pictures. So this is a painting depicting what it would have looked like. So it's really interesting. I mean, I'm not saying that I condone a lot of this, but it kind of shows this topsy-turvy, upside-down world. The people on the outside, all crazy. We've got a man. It was very common in Russia as well for the men to dress like women. So you've got this cross-dressing thing going on, and women dress as men. all running around like these evil spirits, and you see the people in the house kind of getting rid of the spirits. Okay. This is a photo of little Scottish children dressed in masks. So I can say Scottish children from the 19th century were way scarier than anything that we come up with nowadays, because that looks absolutely frightening. But this is what these little kids would dress up as, these kind of little spirits, demon things running around asking for sweets. So, and there was this idea of being tricksters and everything like that. Now, what's really interesting, what I was reading about, is that this kind of overemphasis of gruesome things, death, devils taking over, and everyone dressing as devils. Now, in the Western Church, now of course many churches still celebrate it and All Saints Day, but for example, I read that the Anglican Church used to ring bells on Halloween. Not because of Halloween, but because of it's the vigil night. And they actually banned that. They actually suppressed bell ringing. They used to have candlelit processions. They used to bless barns and homes, in various places to protect people from evil. So all of that was kind of minimized. And when that was minimized, then there was no answer to this kind of this dealing with the devil kind of thing. So I think that... to be honest, Christoph and I were talking about this, is that children love Halloween. There's a certain kind of excitement going out at night, and it's exactly that, confronting something that you don't know, the unknown, and dealing with evil and spirits. So we have to somehow recapture it, I would say, as Orthodox Christians, by not saying, oh, it's it's devil worship and it's terrible and the kids must hide at home, and and if someone knocks on the door, the parents shout at the kids and tell them to go away and tell them this is the devil's celebration. That's what a lot of people do, and if that's what you do, that's also fine. But I would say that your children and my children, for example, I would prefer for them to know that we believe that they don't have any power. It's just like the goats on a leash. We've now, Christ is victorious, and we can kind of confront that. And we don't have to be so scared of it because we have a balance, I should say. And I've seen some places do that. So this is, for example, these are Filipino children getting ready for Halloween, I think. And so a lot of places dress up a lot of the kids as kind of saints, as heroes, as the Virgin Mary, as Saint George, whatever it may be. And the kids have just as much fun, And I'm not sure exactly how they deal with the evil side, but, they may have a kind of balance of that. Now, in Russia, for example, they have another very interesting thing. They have a very traditional nativity puppet show. And this is something that Anastasia Matushka's father used to do a lot. He really loves this play. And it's a double-story setup. And it's basically the story of the nativity, but it's also speaking about Herod. Herod who killed the innocents, Herod who was looking for the Christ child but ultimately wanted to kill him. And it's basically about Herod's being taken to hell. And it's very scary. In fact, the picture I sent on the WhatsApp groups was a picture of that play. And you see this kind of the spirit of death coming to take the soul of Herod. So it's a kind of interesting play because it's got heaven and hell connected. And so you deal with that scary aspect, and that's a way that they've helped to kind of balance that kind of longing to face trouble and evil spirits, but also having the goods, the triumph of the angels, and all that. So I think that's important, and I think that's the way we can possibly try to redeem Halloween. Just on a side note, traditionally the Scots and the Irish didn't make pumpkins; they made turnips. Turnips were hollowed out and made into these scary little lanterns. This is a cast of the original ones they used to do. Again, they used to make them way scarier in the old days than we do now. This is someone they found, and then they made a cast of it. So, but it's also interesting. One of the traditions, it says in Bavaria, one of the traditions was actually these lights that people would put out, not necessarily these scary lights. They were actually to lead the souls back to the home, back to the safe place. You could see the home as the place of the church now, a place of safety. And so the lights would lead the wandering souls of people back to Christ, back to the church, back to the home, back to the place of lights, of family, and all those things. So even the jack-o'-lantern that we have today possibly has a much more positive and kind of Christian idea behind it. So that's something I think that we can also maybe think of when we bring light. People put lights out on Halloween. They're lights leading, us back to a place of goodness, of safety. Okay, so I'm nearly done. So I promise it was a short talk tonight. So Halloween got me thinking about all the feasts that are celebrated, let's just say, in the secular, popular calendar, mostly from America, that has now infiltrated the rest of the world. And so I found these little cheapy thumbnails of them, which I think is fitting, right? So you've got, so this, I typed in the top celebrated feasts like in America, right? And it's Mother's Day, Easter, Thanksgiving, Valentine's Day. I did Easter twice. Christmas and Halloween. Now, if you ask most children, what's your favorite holiday? They'll say, what's your favorite holiday? Oh, Christmas. Okay, at least it's Christmas. See, I've told her. Well, she knows we're listening. But a lot of kids say Halloween because sweets and running around in costumes is so fun, right? And so there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem, my bigger problem I have with Halloween, in fact, is that it doesn't have a deeper meaning, the current day Halloween. There isn't the idea of, yes, the spirit world is coming, attacking us, but we drive it away at the end. It's the same like Christmas, right? Christmas has been has been basically degraded into this commercial holiday. We don't fast the Christmas fast. And I can say my opinion why Christmas has become so little joy in Christmas is because we don't keep the fast. Because by the time you get to Christmas in the Western tradition, everyone's already so bloated because they've been buying chocolates, at the shops because they put them out 2 months earlier. So we've all had our chocolates, we've all had our Christmas cake, and so there is no real sense of climax coming now to Christmas, right? And the meaning of Christmas, of course, is lost because people don't go to church. People don't go to sing Christmas carols. It's more they're listening to Mariah Carey and eating lots of food, basically. And so there's no more joy in Christmas. The same with everything. The same with Valentine's Day. The same with all these various feasts. We have our own Mother's Day feast. We have our Feast of the Theotokos. We have the Feast of the Myrrh-bearing Women. And those are our Women's Day and Mother's Day. And what happens usually on these other days is they become so commercialized that we really have no joy in them. So we want to redeem that by, as Orthodox Christians, we have these feasts. We have the 12 great feasts. So I would suggest that all of us, we write down what dates the 12 great feasts are. We try to celebrate them, to go to church, and to also bring our families into those celebrations. It may be small. It may only be our family. It may only be a few friends who get together on those feasts. But it's a way that we redeem those feasts and we keep the fasts, we keep the preparation up to them. And they'll become much more meaningful for us, much more, how can I say, they'll transfigure us in a way, because the way in which we come to the various parts of the year, it's deeply embedded in us from our ancient roots, And so when we come to the beginning of winter, we naturally do get depressed. We do get sad. We do feel kind of maybe, evil is knocking at the door. And so we have to have a way to bring light into the, in our homes and our life, and to remind ourselves that, evil has been conquered, even if we have to face it. And so a lot of those things I think we can try to do, at least in a small way, to recapture time, to recapture our year, to make it full of meaning and lots of joy. Yes.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
So we are now celebrating for the first time the old calendar Christmas.
Yes.
So does the fast start on the 28th of November?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think it was 40 days basically.
29.
Yeah, the 28th. Now, a lot of people ask me, what are they going to do on the 25th when all their family invites them to have the lamb? So, I mean, I think there was a desert father who, he fasted, I can't remember who it was. I can't remember the name of the desert father, but basically he had a rule when he had guests over, he wouldn't fast. So he would have drink wine and he would, eat whatever, present the people because he was hospitable to them. But then the next day he would fast extra strict. So I'll just leave that there as a recommendation for the 25th. So maybe, if your friends invite you to family dinner, if they're not Orthodox, of course they're going to celebrate on the 25th. I mean, out of love and hospitality, we should go and celebrate. But then again, our fast continues up until the 7th. And I think, at least our parish, I mean, some of the people listening are on the new calendar, so it doesn't apply. But if you are on the old calendar, I think it is a nice way if you're in the Western world or we have, you can, be with family, and then on the 7th, you have no excuse, you have to be at church because you're not at Christmas. So, yeah, I don't know if that helps. Are there any other opinions about Halloween? Do you think we should let our kids go celebrate Halloween, or should we rather keep them at home? Anyone have any experience of that?
I just have a practical question, but it's not about children. It's about adults.
Okay.
So I've been invited to a Halloween dinner,
Okay.
and it's obviously all dressed up in a bit. It will be a bit macabre, knowing the crowd.
Yeah, okay.
And I've agreed to go, although I have no idea. I don't feel very comfortable. Like, it feels like a bit of a macabre liturgy. But I didn't want to not say, because I declined previously. So I don't want to be the prude, but I also don't really like participating in it. So it's kind of going for the people who invited me, who are very close to me. So I'm not so sure, dressing up as something. Obviously, I was thinking of something quite, I don't know if you know Napoleon Dynamite, stuff like that. Like, it's very kind of innocent in a way. But I do feel like maybe I should be there despite not enjoying any of the macabre stuff.
Well, look, I read about the macabre. So what's interesting is that in some of the medieval churches, like in the Roman church, that was seen as a reminder of death. Like when people dress up in these kind of like zombie type of what a medieval, I don't know what a medieval zombie is, but people dress as the dead. Yeah, so it even they sometimes saw it as having some kind of purpose to remind us that death is coming, that and so we should kind of face that reality that earthly things pass away. So, but I mean, that's not necessarily why people are going to that party. I think people are going to this Halloween party as an excuse to dress up and have fun, which is not a bad thing, I would say. But of course,
It is, but it also kind of glorifies it glorifies that kind of dark side, which I don't feel comfortable with. I never have, but I've always just gone as something non-macabre.
Yeah.
Can I maybe just say, the one thing that I find in the Western world is the topic of death and dying is very unpopular.
Yeah.
So maybe you can make an Orthodox contribution, Rudolph, by just saying, so how do you feel about dying? And just put that on the table, because everybody's now dressing up as death, but do they want to really talk about it?
Do that dressed up as Napoleon Dynamite.
No, they just want to drink, really. That's what I think. But anyway.
It's not a bad idea, Magdalena. I remember visiting the monastery of Vatopedi on Mount Athos. Yeah. Every hour, in a little tower over the basilica, there is a skeleton coming out, the death with the
bell, like
not the bell,
with the side,
the side,
yeah,
and it's coming out, and it's pretty scary. I think it's a very good illustration of what Father was saying about keeping us connected with the fact that we are going to die and that death is there, etc. And I follow you, Magdalena. I think it's a good message to get across, because people tend to never think about it, never put that. And at Batopedi in that monastery, I'm telling you, every hour you see it coming out.
Comes out. Eh? Wow, I didn't know that.
It's very expressive. Yeah.
The first time I saw a human skull was in a monastery in Russia, a little tiny monastery. It had a few monks, but there was a bell tower and the door was open. So I went into the bell tower, and right at the entrance was a skull, an actual human skull, just lying there, not put away or anything. And I couldn't believe it. It was like it trumped any Halloween thing people make because it's an actual human skull. But it was of the monks, and they put it there probably as a reminder, probably also connected to the bell tower time. But it was just a skull lying there. So I think the church has its way of also kind of presenting death to us. Christ on the cross is actually part of that, because when we see him on the cross, we see death. But we see it like when Moses raised the snake in the desert, we see it as an antidote to death. So maybe you can go as John the Baptist with his head cut off in Hades, preaching to the people that Christ is coming.
Please repent.
Oh wow, yeah, okay. Maybe go full on. That'll get an audience, believe me.
Because it's very macabre, but it's also true. Like, it's theologically very powerful.
Okay, I'll have to think about it. I nearly didn't go, but I think I should.
One week to sow.
Yeah, because you don't want people to think. I think we have to be careful, because there are. Let me say a few things now on the other side, just so that we can have a balanced view. So there are other people who have mentioned that Halloween has become a festival of choice for people engaged in things that are unsavory, like seances and black magic and witches and things like that. And it's interesting, though, that they've taken a Christian feast and they've now projected their things onto it, because the Samhain festival is very, very kind of unclear what exactly the pagans did. There's lots of very scary stories about what they did, but apparently I read up about it, and a lot of that is much later, been written in the 19th century. But we have to be careful. For example, like these horror movies, going to go watch these horrible horror movies that really have there's no positivity in them at all. It's all just horrible, gruesome, gory. It's just reveling in death and being scared. And I think you can leave watching a movie like that without any sense of no goodness in it. So there are bad things that happen in Halloween, let's just be honest. But we don't want to be scared of it. We don't want to be the prudes that run away from it, because everyone says, oh, well, the Christians, look at them, they're so boring and they don't know anything, and they can't handle anything. So I think there's a balance. Discretion is what I would say is the most important thing. Are there any other comments maybe, or experiences of people? Lizzie, do you remember anything from Halloween?
Well, I don't really celebrate it that much.
Okay, yeah, Lizzie doesn't celebrate it. But unless there's lots of sweets, there we go. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
So I'm open to any other ideas from anyone else.
You can write them in the comments on the WhatsApp group.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all so much then. God bless you. Redeem Halloween for us. And next week we'll continue with our talks on the liturgy, and we'll also start preparing for Christmas, the Nativity of Christ. So God bless you all. Have a wonderful evening. And I'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Father.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Father. Thank you.